Hi everyone, my name's Sam Burden and I'm here today to do my presentation on how to utilize data storytelling for remote cross-functional teams. So within my talk, I'd like to give you an introduction to the company who I work for, which is Maru, and how they utilize data storytelling within their business. An introduction to the business functions here at Maru, and just give a bit of details in terms of what the core functions and team is for cross-functional teams, challenges we face working remotely as a team, and the tools and techniques we applied to translate data to cross-functional teams, and key learnings to take on board for this experience. So I'd just like to give you a bit of introduction to who Maru is. And for those of you who probably don't know, the first Google search we get is of a cat, which is not what we do at Maru, but it just is a little bit of an analogy in terms of like the Maru name. So Maru is all about data storytelling as a business. So it's all about looking at how market research data, and it's all about software and advisory services that help companies with communities and insights, trackers for customer experience and brand, and voice of market programs. So the core functions within Maru have been focused on basically data storytelling for customers, utilizing data, which is kind of a bit of a flow towards the story within this actual presentation itself. So with that in mind, I would like to start off the talk with an introduction to our business functions in terms of the structure within the cross-functional teams. So myself, UX. So UX role is I'm actually a team of one. So I'm actually the prime responsibility of doing user research and doing product design work here at Maru. Just to give you a brief background within my role, this is still a new role, with myself being new to user experience, only been practicing for a year. So I joined the company in April 2021. So it's been, again, another new string to the bow in terms of understanding a bit more about understanding cross-functional teams and user experience. So with user experience still being new to Maru, just to give you a breakdown in terms of my role and responsibilities within the team. So my core role is understanding and advocating the user to the organization. So within that, I am involved with doing user research, working with other team members to define key data points within the organization for either metrics or looking at business objectives, and just utilizing it to advocate changes for the user to the organization for product changes. I'm also responsible for creating requirements from data and also user research to help build product roadmaps. So data itself is a core element of my job role, and I need to utilize that to define strategy and how products should be used going forward. And lastly, my role is focused on being strategic, sorry, I can say that, about changes and priorities required for development. So it encompasses the top two in terms of, again, defining which direction the product changes to go, depending on the user research, and relating that back to the business goals, and defining priorities, again, through various data sources of what should be done first. So that's a bit about my role, a bit about an introduction to myself in terms of being Maru and how data affects my role. So I'd like to leave that on to the other functions within our core team. So the product team. Now, as I just said, I'm UX team one, but actually I fit within the product team here at Maru. So a bit of what I've said just now might cross over in terms of job role and also in terms of how data is used within this actual product team, within this team itself. So the key priority within the job role is actually aligning product strategy with business goals. So that aligns with in terms of what I said about myself being UX tier one. So utilizing data from like users or customer insights or competitive analysis, and defining that data to how the product should look and feel, what new products should be out there, how do we change current products in order to meet that growing need within that, I suppose, ecosystem, and understanding a bit more about how product strategy changes can affect the business goals. Is it going to be to make a change to how a function works? Is that to do with increasing retention within the business itself or that product area? Another one is being logistical about timings and deadlines with other team members. So this is more about aligning goals and also aligning timings with others to ensure that products have been delivered on time, understanding a bit more about priorities, what is a priority and why, and also defining a bit more about the strategy of aligning key goals with other team members. And the final one is looking at creative problem solving for product areas. So this is where data is very heavily focused within this job role, because I suppose being creative with understanding solutions to problems is focused around understanding what the core problem is, why it's happening, and what direction we go next. And this is all surrounding, again, like user data and looking at understanding a bit more about, okay, this is the core problem. We're going to choose it this way. And it's all about gathering different data sources to actually improve the problem that exists within their product areas. That's product team. So within the engineering team, it's very technology focused and implementing changes to the product. So here is where I suppose myself being in product, it's all about understanding how the changes can affect the technology behind the team itself. I would like to just backtrack in terms of define what I mean by our engineering team. So our engineering team is made up of 3 groups. So it's software engineers, both back end and front end, look at testers, and also DevOps team. So that's what I mean by engineering team. So I like to say about them building features and fixing features within the ecosystem. Again, this is either due to feedback from the consumer or looking at data from other sources. So it might be looking at systems like just understanding a bit more about what features are not working, and also looking at any errors that might occur, what technical debt's happening. So it's all about gathering data in terms of what these technical, I suppose the technical debt can have an effect on the product going forward. And it's leveraging their technical knowledge and investigating problems. This is where I suppose myself in product helps in terms of understanding a bit more about, so what feature change will work and what will happen with the infrastructure, what changes will my design features change on how either data is stored or how elements are implemented, what changes within the actual flow of the actual product itself. So they help to make, I suppose, the product come alive. And the customer success team, this is the final team I want to talk about. So within the cross-functional team, they're the ones who are very customer focused. So they're the ones who actually gather the data from customers themselves in terms of gathering that regular feedback through interviews and understanding a bit more about what features not working. Is it through demos that they might do for the client and say, this is a feature that we wouldn't use, and just gathering more qualitative insights to help push product changes. So the ones who mediate between clients and organizations, make sure that what we're producing, what we're changing aligns to their needs and growing needs going forward. And then also utilizing the data from the feedback to help with training and advising clients of products. What can we do to improve this process? So with that in mind, I'm going to go talk about data sources that we have here at Maru, just to give the next step of the data storytelling come alive. So for us, we focus on 2 sources of data. So qualitative, so focus on doing user interviews and usability tests. I'd also like to emphasize on doing customer feedback as well to help gain insights and real, I suppose, golden nuggets in terms of understanding what we can improve going forward. And actually, where are the key pain points? And this data helps to empathize us with the user and actually help to create I suppose, visualize a picture of them, how they use the system, how they use products, what kind of key frustrations they're going through, what kind of top 3 tasks are they trying to complete with the actual product itself. And through this data, it kind of helps make sure that we align that information to creating a better product going forward. And then we also go on to quantitative data, which is information about how the user uses the system. So for us, we have web analytics, which is something we use in terms of understanding the user flow, understanding a bit more data in terms of where, like, how long they spend on pages. This is more about the what, about what they use, and then also how they use it. More an instance, so understanding where they're identifying where key pain points are going forward. We also use quantitative data from our backend system, so like understanding a bit more about creating Microsoft BI reports in terms of understanding a bit more about searches, defining a bit more about how many users use the system. So data is quite heavily involved with our decision-making process here at Maru. And with that in mind, I'd like to go on about how changes we face remotely as a team and how data actually helps us going forward. So for those of you, I don't have to paint the scene here, but I'm guessing that those of you watching this video, you know, we're just about coming out of this pandemic, and we've been spending most of this time behind a computer screen. And as I explained earlier, I'm still pretty new to the organization, and I'm still pretty new to user experience, which is a challenge in itself. I kind of wanted to focus this talk on the challenges within the remote teams. So although we've been focusing on a laptop rather than face-to-face, we've been able to outreach to a wider audience and also make sure that, you know, I suppose with the computer screen, we're available whenever we can, so it makes it easier for us going forward. But I suppose the challenges that are faced within this sort of scenario is the fact that with self being new to this experience, it's sort of harder to connect with fellow team members, because although again, like with either technology like Zoom, it's great because you have face-to-face calls, you can connect with people, you miss that physical connection with somebody that a face-to-face conversation doesn't mean. You don't see somebody's body language, you can't have that, you know, engagement in terms of like, oh, this person is engaging with my talk, and also understanding a bit more about building that authenticity within the team. So it's interesting to sort of understand a bit more about techniques and tools to actually build that confidence going forward. So I'd like to cover a bit more about the key issues about working in a remote team and what we faced. So as I said, about personal connections and getting a new team, it's so much harder. As much as you could set up virtual like games or just to get to know each other, it's still missing that physical connection that what face-to-face contact does. And you want somewhere where you can feel like you can build that trust and also understand a bit more about how each other work going forward. Understanding team priorities and how to work together. So this is something that, although we have a calendar in terms of saying like what you're doing, and all of it, but remotely you don't understand. Again, it's the whole personal connection. It's hard to build that team priorities, what they're working on, how your work works well with that relates into them, how do you work together. And it's something you may have a computer screen having a conversation with somebody, but it's understanding what methods they use to work. You know, how do they plan their time? How do they plan meetings? What information do they want to receive from meetings? How they action them? It's defining, and this is the difficulty with working remotely, you don't get that straight away. It takes a long time, whereas face-to-face, you sort of understand a bit more about these traits. And then finally, it's identifying ways to promote change in development cycle from feature-led to user-centered design. So this is more focused within, I suppose, Maro, going from a UX perspective. However, I would like to sort of point this forward in terms of cross-functional teams and the storytelling element, is the fact that it's all about change. And although the pandemic has changed the way we work, in terms of like on a laptop, work from home or any other location, there's still that whole, you go into, I suppose, when you're on a laptop and you're still having that same work mindset of how you go, how you develop, how you create new products. And it's understanding from yourself being new and also working remotely, how to put incremental changes to change this cycle going forward. So I'd like to start off with our solutions in terms of how we've utilised data storytelling within our cross-functional teams. So the first thing we've done is to defining team objectives. So within this, we have had to understand a bit more about, okay, then, in terms of how we prioritise tasks, what are the overall objectives, both relating back to the organisation and also back to personal goals. So the first thing we've had to use is understand what other team members want to see from data and actions from the user based on the responsibilities. So this is connecting my own personal connection with user experience to other team members' roles. So it's all about breaking down in terms of what kind of data sets people want to see. So, for example, myself from a customer success team, I want to see about what are the top pain points users are facing right now and what the reasons are, because that helps define in terms of priorities of where the user research goes. Why are we researching it? Oh, because a user is struggling to add a project or struggling to remove, and this feature really stops them from doing X, Y, and Z action. So it's all about defining what kind of data sources you want from others, but then also what you can deliver to others as well. So, for example, flipping the switch here, working remotely, myself working with the engineering team, it's about utilising, giving over user research found from users being interviewed about how these use the product, and it helps them to define a bit more about, okay then, and empathize what we're building and the reasons behind it, just to give it more insights in terms of what changes need to be done, because it's all about, associated with user experience, making sure that there's that whole psychological element behind it of the user going through the product and defining a bit more about how they're going to use it, what trigger points are going to go use it from the user flow, and make sure that we're covering the technical elements that are surpassing the user's experience and expectations. So that was the what of what user data, what each team member wants to see from the user data. But how did we do it? So we actually did some team interviews. So it was all about, instead of gathering in a room or a virtual room and speaking to everybody together, the reason being is you have groupthink, and if you have all of them together and say, I want this data and this is the actions I want you to take, it would make a cloudy situation and it would be very autonomous. So doing team interviews with individual teams to start off with has been a great experience in terms of defining a bit more about how to work together cross-functionally, remotely, then also defining what kind of data people want to hear going forward within meetings. So it would end up saying, okay, then finding a bit more about, so techniques going forward, it's all about interviewing them on a one-to-one basis, be personal with that experience, defining a bit more about understanding about their job role, what the day-to-day tasks are, key pain points they face, how they like to receive information, and how do they like to work together as a team, and the experience of not just their silo team together, but how they've worked previously, what's worked well, what's not worked well. So you can get that sort of breakdown in terms of creating that strategic plan for how to work together going forward, and also have that consideration when doing projects. So questions that, if you do team interviews, would be to, how does elements of my role work with theirs? So define a bit more about how your everyday role can affect them going forward and how data can utilize that. So for myself, as I said, I'm a user researcher, and it's all about defining a bit more about how my role affects others. So my user research will affect how product works. So it's all about defining product requirements, giving over empathy in terms of how the user uses the product. With the engineers, it'll be about the user flows, understanding a bit more about how users have found the product so far and giving over that feedback with viable changes, and also working with customer success team, seeing if what I found aligns with what customers are going for, are most concerned about, and creating a strategic plan for changing product features. How they like information presented to them and sent to them. This is a key element, because as much as you can gather as much data as you like, or connecting the data to work remotely, information needs to be presented in a way that people understand. And for myself, it's being a user researcher, it's all about developing empathy. How would I want to receive information, and how would it affect my role going forward? Now, a little bit of a backstory for myself. When I first started off in my job role here at Maru, and I did my first user research, I delivered my findings very monotonously. So, for example, I delivered results from doing user research saying X, Y, Z points to product in a way that helped them to define product strategy and think, oh, this is interesting, we'll take this more going forward. When I spoke to the engineers about it, the key question I got was, so what's it got to do with me? And I didn't really think about that. I thought, oh, information can be shared and it'll be understandable by all. But what I forgot to consider is how the data gathered affects their work, and also understand a bit more about how that will affect us working together going forward. Why is it important? What data we found is going to help me with my job role, and how is it going to affect change within the system? So I realized that actually engineers, or my engineering team, wants, I suppose, information in bulleted points. So it's broken down and simplified into a process that they can understand, and make sure that it relates back to other discussions we've had and why change is going to be happening going forward. How do we develop processes, project processes around their job role? So this is more about understanding a bit more about strategic planning and how each member of the team fits within the actual product itself, the process itself. So again, this is something, a major challenge that we face in terms of working remotely, is understanding a bit more about how old processes within the company currently worked, and it's understanding and communicating with them how they want to be involved with our project. Again, what timings they need to focus on, what kind of data to be to capture, and understand a bit more about their own routine as well, how it affects other project areas they're currently working on. The key question that probably pops up within the data storytelling is, okay, then, so I've developed my team, I've developed how we can work together, I understand a bit more about the data sources in terms of how it relates to each job role, but understand a bit more about how and what type of data is important to their job role. So that's key for myself, being, I suppose, with the UX researcher, but it's also interesting to see a bit more about how data needs to be broken down going forward. So this is how we, I suppose, translate data within the cross-functional team here at Maru. So the engineering team, I've gone for user data as an example. So user data for them would need to be focused around the technicalities of the product and what actions need to be taken into consideration. Product team uses user data for them would be used to focus on actions for the users taking system and specifications, and what specifications required for the product to improve usage. And customer success would be user data for them would need to be focused around cross-functional cross-referencing the user data with customer feedback and determining which features have priority. So all of them, it's all about when you try to either try and locate data or try to gather new data, it's all about understanding how to pitch the understanding of the data going forward and sort of relate it back to the job role, but make sure that it's in a way that relates back to those to focus on the job role and how it affects the project going forward. So the second one, in terms of how to utilize data for cross-functional remote teams, would be choose the right communication tools for displaying user information or any data sources on that matter. So the communication tools we use are Jira. So we utilize that for looking at our backlog, understanding what features need to be changed, looking at prioritization. So for us, it's a great tool because everybody can see it. It doesn't matter what time zone you are, and really can work on it. And it's finding a bit more about key priorities going forward with product builds or any software elements. Like make sure that we're on board with the product planning within our product area. We use Teams a lot, so it's great for data storage and also great for one-to-one meetings to understand a bit more about where we are, the process of our product build. We use Confluence a lot. This is more for product requirements, making sure that we store our data or any research that's found in one place. And it's all about, I suppose, defining a bit more about any user flows and progress within projects. And then Slack we use as a one-to-one communication tool, just quick, and also sending over any findings we may have when doing sort of the data research side of things. And it makes sure that we're all on board within our project teams in terms of any product updates. And it's also good for sending over quick product updates. For example, when I did some user research recently, I put within our, I suppose, my team, cross-functional team, about user data and just doing quick snapshots in terms of what was found and bullet pointing changes going forward. And the final one is create synergies between data storytelling and context of other team members. So as I probably covered before in terms of it's understanding what other team members want to see from the data and actions from the user base on their responsibilities. So with the data in mind, you've got to make sure that there is that context of how that can be utilized going forward. So it's not all just about gathering information, being like, oh, here is what we found from the user, the fact that they liked this part of the product. It's understanding about how data fits within a job role. And I think that's sometimes the difficult thing because sometimes data can be misleading, sometimes it can be about not aligning with their job role per se. And it's sometimes difficult to understand about what actions can be taken with data. So yeah, again, for example, taking quantitative data from like our analytics tool, it might be hard to define a bit more. So it might be a high exit rate for users trying to go through our system, trying to book a product. But it might not be anything wrong with it. It just might be us seeing that data and think, oh, it's bad. But in comparison to other sort of products, it might be not so bad. So it's trying to understand what kind of data will relate back to those actions going forward. And again, it's aligning the insights and translate this information by how it relates to other team members. So how is it going to implement? How is it going to affect the job role? What do they need? Why do they need that data? So an idea that I came up with when I was struggling to understand what kind of data and how to prioritize tasks going forward for user research and also implementing new products was to create a, I suppose, UX to-do list. This is kind of can be cross referenced to other parts of the business as well, but it kind of came up in terms of understanding what kind of data sources would be useful for each team member. So problem suggestion, this is just going to be raw data insights, but it can be useful to all team members to find out a bit more about the context of the problem. Types of issues, this is more related to engineering, and also understand a bit more about what kind of the key problem is. User stories is all about understanding why users going to use the feature, or how they're going to use it, what their key tasks are they're trying to complete through the product itself. And then possible solutions. This is more to do with, I suppose, product and also looking at engineering. How can you align the data to create a better solution going forward for the product? How impactful is the problem? So it's looking at customer success team, looking at data they've utilized in terms of prioritizing of tasks, and finding, is it a problem that needs to be fixed now? Is it causing issues with customers not buying into the product or being able to use the product correctly? Feasibility is understanding a bit more about, okay, working with engineering and product, what is the feasibility of the product going forward? Can it be done? What considerations got to come up with? Time required, that's working together in terms of what timelines we're working with. And type of testing required is kind of more to do with, I suppose, UX, product and quality testing management, just to see what needs to be changed going forward. So this is kind of a good scenario in terms of gathering and capturing data together to understand a bit more about how the product changes can be done going forward, and what data is going to be needed, and also defining a bit more about helping to plan products going forward and product planning. So key learnings from this process is understanding what other team members want to see from data and actions from users based on their responsibilities. I like to change that in terms of understanding a bit more about how to capture data whilst working remotely and how it affects team members, because I suppose the running theme throughout this is data is a great backbone that can't replace, I suppose, face-to-face communications, but it can be a guidance in terms of how you can work together as a team going forward, how it can unite you in terms of that one objective within the working environment of how you want to change products or how you want to grow as a team. So defining team objectives and process for work projects. So data has been a massive vehicle going forward in terms of defining a bit more about how changes can be done, but it kind of unites everybody together remotely in terms of how you can change, why you're going to change it, and how data can be implemented within the product, the process going forward, and how it relates back to the job role. Choose the right communication tools for displaying user information. So it's being specific about how you communicate this data to each member of the team. How is it going to impact the work? How you communicate to them? What is important to each part of the team? And how data can be actually help grow together and create that mutual understanding. So create synergies between data storytelling and context of other team members. So this is all about gathering data, why it's important to others, how it can affect the job role. And it's not just building empathy with what the data requirements you've got, but it's the gathering empathy in terms of how you work together within the team itself. How does data affect it? How you present data? What time do you need to capture data for them within the actual project roadmap? So thank you very much for listening to my talk. Hope I've given you some great insights in terms of how we've learned to utilize data storytelling within cross-functional teams here at Maru. I hope I've given you some key points going forward in terms of if you go through superannuation yourself at the moment, and within that sort of environment. And here are additional information and contact details about myself. So I've left my LinkedIn, Twitter, and website details, should you wish to know more about this subject area, or just know more about myself in terms of user experience and my work here at Maru. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you very much.